I always give this analogy when I'm taking care of patients in the nursing home or long-term care center. No one is talking about how much money they have when they're sick. That is the least of their worries when they're sick. They're always, how can I get better? That's how I always try to, put people in that window, like perspective. Like when you're down and out, when you're on the bottom, when you're in the pits, when you're seeing a person like me in the hospital standing over you, your least of your concerns is your finances. You're like, how do I get out of here, Dr. Barry?
Hello, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I am so excited. We have a very special guest today. His name is Dr. Barry Pierre. Some of you guys might want to call him Dr. Barry. That's what he's known for. He is a board certified internal medicine physician, as well as the CEO of a company called Pierre Medical Consulting. And Dr. Barry, he's a blogger, a podcast host. He often hosts Lunch and Learns with Dr. Barry, and he likes to leverage his professional knowledge and clinical expertise to improve really the quality of people's lives. And I am so excited today because, health is so important. We see two extremes that's happening right now in the economy and pandemic. We have those that have resigned from work and said, no more work for me. And then we've seen those that have said, what, I'm going to pick up the slack. The work needs to get done. And I'm going to do two jobs right now. And today I want to talk to those that have really been doing those two jobs, who have been burning that stick out on both ends of the candle, and really about prioritizing our health and really optimizing that. And so join me in welcoming Dr. Barry to our platform. Hi, Dr. Barry. How are you doing today?
Well, Susanne, I want to thank you for, allowing me to kind of grace your platform. I am just very excited to talk to your audience about, something that I live and breathe, which is health, and, trying to stay that way.
I love that. So Dr. Barry, you are a internal medicine physician, and, we have quite a following of healthcare providers on our podcast, those that have started businesses and have, really found themselves having to pivot during the pandemic. And, I always like to get the background story of how has your journey been during these last couple of years, because you've been frontline in many cases. And I'm sure there've been other things of people not coming in sometimes too, just because of fears of the pandemic. So tell us about your journey.
Yeah, first of all, this pandemic has definitely been one of the trying times and the healthcare professionals' really livelihood, right? A lot of us will likely never experience going through a pandemic like for the rest of our careers. And we didn't really have anyone to lean on because, a lot of our predecessors never had to deal with a pandemic either. And as an internal medicine physician, I'm also a hospitalist. So when we talk about the front lines, when people were running away from COVID, COVID was coming towards me. Like I had to go to it, to the point where we were taking care of patients with COVID when we didn't even really know, like, is this COVID, is that COVID? We didn't really know how to treat. We didn't have all of the, weapons in our arsenal to really take care of this pathogen. Really seeing what this pandemic has done from beginning to end, not only as a hospitalist physician. At the time, I was a program director. So not only am I having to really counsel my patients, but I'm also counseling medical residents who are learning on the job during a pandemic. So it's definitely been a whirlwind experience that, I hope to never have to experience again, but I'm appreciative of being able to come out on the other side.
You guys are the true heroes. I mean, you really charged face forward, as you said, during this, where everybody had that luxury of staying in. You picked up for those that were responsible and got sick, and those that were not necessarily all responsible and got sick. So you guys were definitely the heroes in this from that. One of the things that I've seen with entrepreneurs is, we've had the crowd that has, we call the Great Resignation. There's like, sorry, I'm out of here. And then we had the people that picked up two jobs, meaning like, they had their companies, they had no one to do the work. And they said, what, it's got to get done. So I will work the 80 hours to get it done. And, we're seeing some things that are happening now, after prolonged of doing other people's jobs as well as your own, it starts to have its impact. Dr. Perry, can you talk a little bit about what happens when we don't take care of our health as entrepreneurs? What you start to see?
Sure. I think one of the first things, especially as an entrepreneur, one, we think that we can do everything on ourselves, right? Like that's just kind of the way we're kind of ingrained. And we go through a process like this pandemic where we were able to start delineating roles, hopefully able to start delineating roles and kind of take some of that mental pressure off of us of having to perform 24/7, as far as stress hormones that are kind of released because we're always under pressure of doing so. We were able to kind of let some of that go prior to the pandemic. And of course, and you kind of mentioned it with this Great Resignation, where you had, employees who were either forced not to work or say, you know what, because of this pandemic and I see, things on a different horizon, I'm not going back to work, or I'm not, like, we see job openings everywhere, but people aren't applying for it. They say, you know what, it's not really worth the risk to me anymore. But as a business owner, we don't have that luxury to say like, okay, all right, well, I won't work either. No, we have to kind of keep the show going. So what we've seen is that our entrepreneurs, especially those in lead, have to take on multiple roles and multiple responsibilities that they either had to take on before and haven't had to for a while, or this is all new to them. So you have, again, it's almost like a new employee, right? They're having to learn customer service. Some are having to learn their accounting. Some are having to learn their finances. Some are having to learn things that they thought they wouldn't have to be responsible for. And it's put so much effort and energy, not only while they're working, but you should notice, but we both notice is there's really never a time when you're off as an entrepreneur. But, when you have help, you can at least kind of, again, turn the mental clock off. Imagine not even being able to do that no more. So like your work continues to carry you and continues to kind of, unfortunately, run you to the ground.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And so, Dr. Barry, how do you start to know when things are going off kilter, when you've kind of had as much as you can take?
No, I think a very good point is one is it's usually mental first. A lot of times, a lot of us are looking for kind of the physical breakdown, like I'm physically too tired to get there. I can't lift anymore. Or I can't do anymore. But a lot of times mentally, we start kind of inserting those thoughts. Like, wow, this is a lot of work. Like, oh, I got to come back tomorrow. All of a sudden you start dreading the next day. All of a sudden you start having this future level of dread for work that, you've been accustomed to doing. And then it just kind of wears on you and wears on you. And then when I talk about kind of like that blending, all of a sudden your work and your personal, it just seems to mesh. So you never have any level of reprise. So you see this, and I see this a lot with entrepreneurs, is that they become physically and mentally tired of just doing even what they would consider mundane activities in their business, because even the thought of doing the mundane activity becomes tiresome, becomes worrisome, becomes becomes they have to dread going. I'm a physician and I hang with a lot of physicians, and I know a lot of my physician colleagues who dread having to come to work, right? Which is sad to see, right? They dread having to come to work. They dread the drive coming into the hospital, right? They dread having to talk to 1, 2, 20, like everything for them before they even experience it is a negative feeling. So we typically see it in that mental breakdown first of like everything they do is not, kosher for them.
That's interesting. So the body follows the mind then. It starts in the head, right? It starts with noticing that I'm not excited about doing this project today or going into work or reviewing this paper. And then it's just the physical that follows next. Then what happens after that mind starts to go? What are the signs of the beginning of that physical deterioration?
I tend to see a lot of my colleagues and people I see is, one, they're either restless because they're not getting enough sleep, or they're getting way too much sleep, right? Because just the thought of waking up is such an overbearing process. They're like, so they find reasons, right, to stay in bed longer. They find reasons to come into work a little bit later. They're constantly just kind of finding reasons to kind of, be away from what they consider their stressor environment. From an orthopedic related standpoint, we start seeing a lot of arthritic related pain. Even if the task they're doing isn't necessarily physical in nature, but they're just bones and their joints and everything just starts hurting. I see even GI related, gastroenterology related manifestations, right? They're always having an upset stomach. They're always not being able to eat, or they're eating too much. Like everything, unfortunately, in their system of what we call homeostasis or balance has been completely thrown off. So it's unfortunately everything is up for grabs when you start getting that cycle of a downward spin.
Wow, that's really interesting. Just like small things, right? Or eventually the bigger things, right? Like the arthritis, but just your stomach constantly hurting or just having an upset stomach is just the beginning of that deterioration. What are some things that we can do as entrepreneurs to prevent that deterioration from happening or stop it, right? If it's already started?
I think first and foremost for a lot of us is we have this wall of acknowledgement is what I like to call it. Like we will not even acknowledge that we're facing problems. We will not even acknowledge that we're dealing with stress. And let's not even talk about the D word, right? Like just even blurting out like, yeah, I might feel depressed about what's going on with my situation is something that is so taboo. And again, I can speak especially because a lot of my medical colleagues, that's what they're experiencing, right? A lot of them have just a difficulty of really acknowledging that I need help. I always say this as a medical student, even a medical resident, our task was like, hey, you're responsible for doing everything. Like, this is all you're like, hey, I need you to run over here. I need you to see this patient. Like, you do it all. And we didn't really ask for help because it was kind of seen as taboo, unfortunately, in our medical training. And when you became an attending, you just kind of carried a lot of those same kind of practices, right? Like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to do it all. I'm going to do it all. And then when you become an entrepreneur, I see the same type of thing where most of us start out solo. So most of us start out on the ground level. Most of us start out doing everything. And then when we're put in a situation like this pandemic has done, that kind of forces us back in that position where we're having to do it all. We don't want to reach out and say, hey, Barry, I'm stressed right now. Like, Barry, I don't even really want to go to work. We won't even tell our family. We won't tell our spouses. We will not let the world know that we need help. And we all know if you don't tell people you need help, the average person isn't going to realize you need it.
No. So it starts with, admitting that you need help and asking for that help because that's the only way that you hit the wall, as you say, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have to hit the wall. And you're right, as entrepreneurs, we carry the weight for our team, right? We have to project, even if we don't build it inside that this is temporary, we're going to make it through, even a hard situation. Because I don't think there's a business in America that didn't go through a hard situation, right? With COVID, right? Where there's couldn't get labor or, had a change in their financial situation, especially in the restaurant industry. But, we have to keep that faith so that our team still believes, right? They can keep the faith with it, which can be challenging.
Even those who experience it on the flip side, right? Like those who experience where like, all right, like we're the only, like, especially, like we're the only thing open, right? So you're going to be busy 24/7. There's no time off for you. Like I tell people it works on both spectrums. Either you're not doing enough work because you physically or like, because a pandemic is here and you can't do your work, or you've got so much work that it's now become, such a burden to you.
Yeah. And it's interesting, about help too, like the humility of asking for help. What happens if there is no help, right? Meaning like, right now we're going through that great resignation, like we talked about, where, there may not be on the team that level of expertise outside of you. We can obviously, maybe we can't do it. We don't have to be arrogant and say that we're the only one that can do it. But, sometimes, the team doesn't have the experience to do it the way that you do it, right? For example, if you have a medical practice, you may be the only physician there. And as much as your medical staff want to help, they just don't have that MD behind them to help.
They can't do it. Exactly.
What do you do then? Dr. Barry?
Sure. And I tell my entrepreneurs, especially when you're in those positions where there's no lifeline to call, right? Like, and I think that's the biggest issue, right? Like I've tried to exhaust my options, but unfortunately there are no options to exhaust. I always say you have to take a step back and say, you know what? Like, am I doing too much, right? Because you begin to think more about the business than you do yourself. And our businesses, especially for entrepreneurs, our businesses are our babies. But I always give the analogy, when you're in an airplane, they always tell you put your oxygen on first before you help someone else. So you can't put your oxygen in the business. You can't put your all in the business if you yourself, right, isn't ready with your oxygen ready and to go. So I always say you have to sometimes look back, because what typically gets us in trouble is that we want to operate our business as if a pandemic like didn't storm through. we want to operate our business as if we're not short staffed, right? We want to operate our business as if, you know what, when we look around the room, there's no one who can do your job but you. But you have to understand, like, all right, you know what, I got to be honest with myself. Like, I can't do all of this at the level that I may want. So I'm going to have to reevaluate. And unfortunately, that's that looking into self, right? Which a lot of us don't do, right? That sometimes we need the help to look into ourselves. Like, I need to look into myself and say, like, all right, what can I actually do that's not going to cause a continued burden to me? Like, I think that's probably the biggest hurdle for a lot of us. Like, just be honest, like you're not going to be able to operate. Like I had physician colleagues who, because of when everything was shut down, they had outpatient practices. And if you have an outpatient practice, no one can go to your office, right? So all of a sudden your lifeline of, finances is done. Like, there is no patient coming to see. So you have to think, what can I do in this situation that does not depend of what was the past? And I think a lot of us continue to hold on to that past so much that it drowns us.
Right. It's the great reinvention, right? Figuring out how to do things differently.
Yeah.
We've seen physicians go online, and
which
really,
I've been very happy for. I've been begging them to do it.
and that's been really neat. I know one of the things that our firm did was we consider becoming a boutique service, and realizing that we couldn't help everyone. And so figuring out who can we help and serve the best, and really focusing on that area, because, there's only so much time in a day, and to have the impact and the results, it takes time and lots of love. And so figuring out where that niche is for that boutique service was something that we had to really explore and create on there with that.
They say, especially when it comes to business, when you serve everybody, you don't serve anybody, right? Well, like when you're trying to fill up the masses, and all of a sudden you realize, like, all right, I am, again, that's where you're like, hey, I'm too strained. Like, I literally cannot talk to all of these people. I literally cannot serve everyone who I want to serve. So, you and like a lot of business owners have had to say, you know what, I need to look to myself and say, like, all right, which population, which niche can I serve to the best of my ability without, again, I always say, as an entrepreneur, you have to be greedy, right? You have to put your oxygen on first. Who can I serve that's not going to, again, put me in more dire stress trying to serve someone else?
Definitely. I know, like with some of our physician clients, one of the things that the pandemic did was risk went up. You guys were front center, but at the same time, the insurance billings didn't necessarily go up. And so they found themselves in a conundrum of, I'm more in demand than I've ever been in it before, but it is costing me more. My staff want more. They need more, right? Because, they could easily join the Great Resignation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're making under 50K at that point,
which a lot of talking some truth right now.
Which a lot of medical assistants were making less than 50K, and the question was, how do they stay profitable? And I'm curious. I know that you work with a lot of physicians. What were you seeing in some of those areas of how us being a profit first channel, we have to go there? How did you see some of your fellow workers or fellow physicians really adjust to that phenomenal?
I think one of the biggest one is they realize, okay, what is some of our biggest expenses? Because the best way to increase the amount of money you're getting is spending less, right, on that back end. And for a lot of them, it was their physical land of real estate, and it was the fact that, like, wow, I'm paying for this commercial building that I literally cannot even go in. And even if I could go in, my patients are scared to come see me. So I need to devise a way where I can still serve my patient, but may not necessarily need this huge building with 10 rooms. And so we saw this switch, especially in the healthcare field, of telemedicine. Now, it was always thought of, it was always gestured like, oh, we should do telehealth. Oh, that'd be nice. And then the pandemic came and said, like, oh, you're going to do telehealth or you're not going to survive. And so I saw a lot of my colleagues switch over to telehealth. I saw a lot of my colleagues become much more efficient, even with their computer usage. I'm younger, well, quote unquote, right, on the medical side, right? So a lot of my older colleagues, they weren't really used to having to deal with the computers and new technology. That's something they didn't want to have to do. They were still writing on paper charts or having someone else do the EMR. But because of this pandemic, now all of a sudden they were seeing patients from, sometimes their office, sometimes from their office at their personal residence. And then the patient could be at their home still having the visit. And fortunately, insurances were paying as if you saw them in the building. So that was kind of nice during the pandemic as well. So I've seen a lot of digitizing our profession. I always rag on the healthcare field because I feel like we're always the last to adopt technology. But I feel like at the time, like we should have been doing telemedicine, right? We should have been offering our patients alternative ways to see us and be treated, because we never think about it on the other side, right? Like for a patient who has to see you for a 10 o'clock appointment, let's say they work. That means they have to take the half day off just to see you. They got to drive to your office. They got to sit in your office. Then they got to turn around and sit in your room. And then you may come to see them for 10 minutes. So imagine now if I'm especially a lot of the patients I take care of, more lower income. So they've lost half a day of work for 10 minutes of work that they could have did in their car, right, at work. We need to, and that's where when you said you're going to try to meet your clients, right, with the switch that your accounting firm is doing. Like we have to start meeting our patients. And one thing this pandemic did is said, like, hey, like if you don't go meet your patients, like you're going to be continued out of business. So with that, just kind of spending less, being able to kind of maximize our time more. I saw a lot of my physician colleagues able to kind of generate, more of a stable income during the height of the pandemic.
No, that's really good. Some of the other things that we've seen too is going more to non-insurance services, so not collecting insurance. The other thing that we've seen more of is going more into the surgical area where there are higher billings versus the routine medical care too, is what we've seen. That has significantly increased profits doing it that way also is what we've seen. I don't know if you've seen that on your end, but
what happens, especially for the aspect of like I think our generation of physicians, like we realized that our older physician colleagues weren't as business savvy and really didn't. I think they were I hate to call it, but they were sold a lie, right? That you didn't have to be business savvy. All you need to do was care for the patient and you'll be taken care of. And unfortunately, the business of healthcare humbled a lot of my colleagues. And that's when I talk a lot about physician burnout. A lot of it is due to the fact that now a lot of my physician colleagues aren't really in charge of making the decisions for their livelihood, right? They aren't in charge of making their decisions for their patients, right? Someone who didn't go to medical school, who didn't spend all the time there in residency is making that decision for them. So they become disenfranchised and really depressed with everything kind of going on. So I've had plenty of colleagues who say, you know what, I'm not even entertaining that playing field and going right to what you mentioned with the direct primary care. Like, hey, I want to have this one-on-one relationship with you, right? You're going to pay me a cash balance. And if you want, you can send, reimbursement to your insurance, because a lot of people don't realize that's how it typically works. You can send your reimbursement to insurance, but I don't want to have to deal with them. And I think as technology and as time progresses, you'll see more and more colleagues, especially in the primary care setting, kind of go that route. Because I think you hit something that's big that I don't think a lot of people know, that in medicine, unfortunately, how you get paid is procedural. Right. The more procedures, the more surgeries, the more things you do, insurance companies say, hey, you know what? That's worth more to us. So we're going to pay them more. But if
they don't understand, they charge more for, right?
Right. But if I come in and I talk to my patients about their blood pressure, their diabetes, their cholesterol, and I prevent them from going to dialysis, I prevent them from having a heart attack, I prevent them from needing open heart surgery, they don't look at that as financially lucrative, so they pay us less. So it's so many unfortunate things that are occurring, but I think really this pandemic has kind of sped it up, that you're going to see a lot of especially healthcare professionals kind of go this route. That like, no, they want to take the business back in their own hands.
Exactly. And it's interesting too. I mean, at the end of the day, we want our doctors to be healthy and happy, because healthy doctors keep us alive longer. So yes. We definitely want that. That is definitely important with that. And And so, doctors need to be compensated fairly. So it makes sense. It just makes sense. Now, Dr. Barry, you have been an implementer of the Profit First method. We had a little conversation before we started. Tell me about how Profit First has been going for you.
Yeah, so I love my wife, right? Because she started recognizing when I got out of residency, again, I was having some of these same questions that a lot of my physician colleagues are having now. I'm like, you know what? The way this business of medicine is going, it's not really for me right now. So I need to start taking advantage of things that are for me. I need to start being a little bit more financially literate. Because again, all they told us was like, oh, just take care of your patient, take care of your patient. We got you. We'll take care of the administrative work. That's how they sold it to us. So she got me the book. She got me Profit First. And I think I read that in like a day, probably a day and a half. I was like, this makes so much sense. And it's such a concept that when you think about it, you're like, yeah, why wouldn't you want to pay yourself first? Like that just makes all of the sense in the world. But it goes into this discussion of learning how to budget, learning how to plan, learning how to decide like, hey, this is what I'm setting aside. That money's gone. Don't even account for it. This is what you have to work with. And of course, it's so funny. Like you go through the book. So of course I go to my bank and I'm like, hey, like I want to have 4 separate accounts. I want to do this. And they're like, huh? I was like, hey, I want to be able to do this, and that. And they're like, why do you need 4 separate accounts? Wait, like, so of course I could tell, like the book said, like sometimes you're gonna run to those tellers that have no clue, right? What you're talking about. They're like you don't need 4 business accounts. I was like, no, like the way I want to set up, I need my 4. I need my profit. I need my tax. I need my operating. I want it there. So I eventually found a bank who was like, oh yeah, like I do that too. Like, and this is what typically happens. Like, oh yeah, I do that too in my business, and set me up, and I've been straight ever since.
I love it. And we talked about it earlier about the importance of reducing stress, right? So we don't start to get those physical elements. And
yes, like imagine not having to worry about your taxes at the end of the year because you've already every year, every check, and when it goes in, that's the tax money. I'm not even thinking about it. Like it's there. And
exactly.
By the time the end of the year comes, like, oh, tax time. Okay, here you go. Like it just is such. And as entrepreneurs, anytime we can, spend less time making a decision, that's better for us. Like if it's just boom, automatic, like, oh, this is how it happens. This is how it goes is better for us. It's when we have to think about it, ponder it, look over it, like dissect it. That's when we start getting into trouble.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Finances definitely has to be on clockwork. It has to have a process. And then, if you implement that good sound tax strategy with your accountant in a year, it's just more bonus, right? What doesn't get used in a tax account it just becomes pocket money.
That's it.
Or retirement money or investment money. So lots of great things in that sense. Now, Dr. Barry, how does our viewers and our listeners, how do we reach you? How do we find you in order to work with you to learn more, to connect more about our health, to connect about our practice management? How do we find you and work with you?
Sure. So in fact, they can go to drbarrypr.com/profit talk. And that will actually have a link to all of my social media platforms. For those who may know, like I've been one of the physicians who've always been championing like us doctors need to get on social media. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic for a lot of my colleagues to come on, really just to expound expertise and figure out different ways to generate income that does not require you to be in that clinic office. So they go to drbarrypr.com/profit talk. All of my links are there. As a fellow podcaster, I would definitely appreciate you coming, join the Lunch Learn with Dr. Barry. We go week to week, just really giving just health information. Of course, obviously, it's been heavy COVID for the past couple years because, it just is what it is. But we definitely talk about a lot of other different topics other than COVID.
Yeah. And COVID's going to be here for a while in one form or another. So, Indeed. But health is going to be here, right? And one of the best ways to have an enjoyable life and enjoy your profits is to have great health, right?
Yes.
Who wants to have terrible health and have lots of profits? So it's all a balance.
Think about Steve Jobs, right? Like I'm pretty sure, right? If he could trade in his billions, he would rather still be here. I always give this analogy when I'm taking care of patients in the nursing home or a long-term care center. No one is talking about how much money they have when they're sick. That is the least of their worries when they're sick. They're always, how can I get better? That's how I always try to, put people in that window, like perspective. Like when you're down and out, when you're on the bottom, when you're in the pits, when you're seeing a person like me in the hospital standing over you, your least of your concerns is your finances. You're like, how do I get out of here, Dr. Barry?
Exactly. And they'll spend every dime they have to get out of there. So best thing you can do is not get in there in the first place, right? Listen to the
Indeed.
warning signs. Well, thank you, Dr. Berry, so much for joining us and for sharing your knowledge. I'm going to have your link in our show notes so that they can reach you and reach out to you to learn more. Thank you again so much for just the wealth of information you've shared today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And again, for your audience, you are such a breath of fresh air. Like I said, I was listening, I was like, oh, let me listen to it. And it was so refreshing to see like, okay, yep, this is a person I can follow, listen to, the kind of guy my plans. I appreciate you, doing what you're doing, because now I have another podcast added to my weekly listens.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Berry. Until next time.